Hello, listeners. It's Nicole here with another episode of Builder's Journey on the Club Pod. In this episode of Builder's Journey, I spoke with Matthew Chaim, singer, songwriter, and conspirer behind one of my favorite Web3 music communities, Songcamp. We discussed his continued developments with Songcamp, as well as the many projects that have spun out, and the learnings from his time as a builder. These include making space for creativity and curiosity, the process of world building, including the story of Elektra, leading with a core team in Web3, and how he brings improvisation into his leadership style. Hey, Matthew. How's it going?
Hello, good. Good to be here.
Welcome. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining. As you know, we've been exploring the builder's journey and talking to projects that have gone through our accelerator or who have been part of Seed Club. And I've been lucky enough to watch and in some cases be part of what you've been building for over 9 months, 10 months, a little while. And so I'm really excited to have you join us today and talk a little bit about how you do what you do and how that process works, and hopefully uncover some tips and strategies for a lot of the other people building in the space. So before we dig in, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about camp, Songcamp, whatever it's evolved into these days.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, good to be here. Excited to chat about this stuff. So, yeah, my name's Matthew. I am from Montreal, Canada. That's where I live still, and I am primarily a musician, singer, songwriter, and have been kind of pursuing that as a career, probably starting seriously about like 5 or so years ago. And then before that was like living in Montreal, working kind of in like the startup digital marketing kind of space. And then music kind of grabbed me more and more. And I ended up moving to LA and sort of doing the singer songwriter stuff there first, and then signed a small deal and put out an album off of that in late 2019 under my own name. Was releasing songs under my own name for a few years prior to that, but that was like the first kind of album I put out. And then COVID hit like 3 months later. I was still in LA at the time, but didn't feel comfortable being a Canadian without like proper health insurance in the States and during a pandemic. And for that and other like non like just administrative, not really fully feeling like I was settled in the States, I just like was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to Montreal. And now I've stayed in Montreal, and kind of settled back down here. And during that time when I first got here, a friend of mine, a very close friend who I started catching up with because we were living close to each other, was playing deeply in kind of the Web3 or crypto space on like the more DeFi or decentralized finance side of things. But then he started educating me on NFTs, and that's what really grabbed me whole late last year. And through kind of just falling down the rabbit hole and soaking up all of that stuff, and as a musician, seeing how this could like empower artists and really extend the kind of like creativity and canvas of creativity past the art that we're making, but towards how we distribute and monetize that art. That really just ignited a fire within me of like inspiration. And so off of that, sort of just immersing myself in the space and educating myself and playing around with NFTs a little bit on my own, I ended up standing up Songcamp in March of this year with that intention of just like running some experiments and playing in the space with other musicians, and spoke about it on a few other discords and in a few other communities, Seed Club being kind of the primary one I was doing that with. And then some musicians fell into the Discord, and we started having these conversations and sort of kind of quickly came up with how to run our first experiment. And with the name being Songcamp, I had come up doing songwriting camps over the last years that really had a big effect on me as an artist. So I liked that as like a container for us to like experiment with. So we ran a songwriting camp, and then since then been running weirder songwriting camps that kind of extend past that and into like just Web3 NFT rollout experimentation and what else we could throw at the wall. And so that continues, and it's been going for, like you said, almost 9 months.
Yeah, congrats on that. And I've definitely been enjoying the weird and weirder journey. So yeah, it's very cool. So I think that one of the things that I'm most curious about as far as like how you do things and how you balance these two is, as you mentioned, and I remember when you first set up a meeting and you started telling me about Elektra originally. And I was taking notes because there were so many pieces of how you were sort of unrolling this, and the line between reality and fantasy and actual work and game, and how NFTs and tokens figured into all of that. It was so imaginative and complex, like extremely complex. And so I think that one of the pieces that, and this is maybe, a bigger question, but I think that, as somebody who's been leading something in this space now for, 9 or 10 months, and continuing to stay really creative, one of the things I'm most curious about is how you give space and continue to give space for that creativity. And obviously you're an artist, so it must be perhaps part of your practice, but I think it's so easy to be distracted and just busy in the discords and reading about the stuff and on Twitter and all of those pieces. And yet something like Elektra is, and we should talk a little bit about what it is, you really need space to like develop that network and that world and that narrative. So I'd love to talk about Elektra and like where that came from, but then also more broadly, how as a builder do you also make time to be creative?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess to start with like the context of Elektra, and I remember that first call, and it was very much deep in like the ideation phase. I think like it was like all over the place, and I remember a lot of the calls I was having around that time were just like kind of all over the place, and each call was different because things kept changing and kept evolving the idea and like chiseling away at it. But essentially, the way I explain Elektra is it was also a songwriting camp, kind of like that first camp we ran in the spring, but this time we also kind of stood up a uh, like almost like a pop-up production house around that songwriting camp to develop the world and story of Elektra. Elektra being this fictitious, I mean, it doesn't feel fictitious to me anymore. It feels very real, but this fictitious world in like a different dimension where music is energy. And the idea there was we wanted to do something more ambitious in the first camp. First camp involved 13 people total, 9 musicians, like 3 groups of 3 creating music. But we wanted to include more people, and we kept having these conversations about like how do we tether together like a bigger group of people around like a shared like mission. And the answer that kept coming back to us was like narrative, like story is what can glue this whole thing together. So we started to like create this like scaffolding or outline of a story called Elektra, where music is energy and the world is dying and we've been sent there to save it with our music. So this is what kind of created that glue for the camp. And then we had again 9 musicians, 3 groups of 3 creating the kind of 3 pillar songs. And then we had this wider network of sound designers, script writers, visual artists, strategists, a few devs putting together this world, this story through audiovisual NFTs, through a kind of interactive Discord flow and game that the audience can kind of go through and learn more about this world and eventually help in like participate in saving this planet. So yeah, there were kind of like a lot of parts to it, a lot of mechanics that went into it. We also ran a crowdfund on the front end of that, which launched the Elektra token, brought in some ETH, and created a sort of audience to go through that game. So yeah, it was very kind of imaginative and a huge leap from the first camp for sure. And even in speaking to people who were like part of the first camp and like were kind of helicoptering around Songcamp, like some people were like extremely excited about it. They're like, "Wow, this is galaxy brain." Other people were like, "I don't understand what you're talking about. Maybe just do what you did again because it worked." And there was some drive to do that, but like it was me and a few artists sort of at the helm of this project, and like and I think this kind of maybe segues into the second part of your question, which is like I think like artists like to like burn down things and then start anew. At least that's like how I've always wanted to do things. I what comes to mind is actually what's his Henry Miller has a like the author has a great like short story in it. Like he has this anthology of essays that I have called Wisdom of the Heart. And the first story, I think it's the first one, called Creative Death. And it's all about like how the creative needs to like kill themselves essentially over and over again, be like reborn. So yeah, I feel like there's some of that in these practices of like, okay, we already did that. It's like it doesn't ignite that same like novelty and imagination. So we want to like stretch towards that. And so a lot of it was developed in conversation with like two or three other folks who were part of the first camp and really stayed close to the project and wanted to keep pushing it forward. And we just had a lot of these like, yeah, brainstorm calls and like creating mind maps and visuals. And it feels like we're using the same muscles we might use to like write a song, to like write the vision for this project and create that world. And I think, yeah, to your point on like distraction and being kind of sucked into this corner of the internet we call Web3 and like the Discords and the Twitters, it is hard to like create that space, even for, I'm probably writing like a lot less. I have been writing a lot less music than I have before like running this project, because it kind of like grabs you in. But I know that when I do like get pulled back into like creating some music or making some art or even using the muscles to like imagine this world and project, sort of like anchors you back into some like creative core that is necessary to move from. And it's when you like lose that like tether to that core by just constantly being distracted in this stuff. It's like your thoughts completely change. So I think it's super important to create that space, but it's definitely difficult in this world for sure.
And do you do that? It sounds like there's a sort of trusted group of folks that you create with, or that sort of support that like imagination and creative play.
Yeah, it's sort of been like, yeah, sort of, and it's kind of changed a little bit and morphed and evolved since like the second camp and all that stuff. But it's sort of just like a package or like kind of like a running thing of just calls, like having phone calls or video calls on Discord or whatever, without like so much of an agenda. And it's interesting, as a project grows now, it's like becoming more important to have sort of more like agenda calls and establishing what roles people are playing and all that stuff. And that's actually, I find more challenging to actually start to like structure things in a more solidified way. Because the looser agenda free calls are like more, I think, our bread and butter of just like throwing around ideas and seeing where they go. The other thing I recognize too is like as the things grow, these ideas and the vision and directions you start to like think of and express, they hold more leverage because like more people are involved in the project, and like as a decision is starting to be made and people start to like wrap their thoughts and imagination around that direction, there's just like the ship is bigger and it starts to like move in that direction, and it's harder to turn the wheel. So I'm starting to recognize that happen too, is like kind of that agility can get a little bit more difficult. So kind of like trying to figure out how to navigate that as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I do think that you're at a place where I think a lot of projects are going to be. Right now, a lot of people are in that just like anything's possible, think it, dream it, do it, why not, YOLO type space. And I think people are really enjoying that. And it's very interesting to hear a little bit of a tale from, the future, basically from, the Elektra of DAOs of, like what it looks like when you start to scale and need agendas for meetings. And, that's wild. Well, speaking of regular meetings, I think that there's another practice that I love within Songcamp, which is the weekly squad call. I love that that's, something that we can all depend on, that we know is going to be there, and is very much, I think, a big piece of that Songcamp culture. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit first just about, how you go about doing that, because I think it feels in some ways like you bring a very casual vibe to it. But I'm guessing that it's not completely thrown together. even though it feels very comfortable and casual and, easy. So I'm curious how you think about those calls as, as a DAO leader.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's very important to me, and it does feel like this dependable thing, this anchor, and we basically call it now like the heartbeat call. It is the heartbeat of Songcamp every Monday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and it's been that way since the very first Monday that like I put up the Songcamp Discord, and that consistency has felt very important, especially because you know I mean the whole space feels like all over the place and volatile, but even adding on to that the fact that like we're basically like popping up these projects and then dissolving them and then popping up another one and running these different like it's almost like reimagining it does give that creative canvas again and again, so that even as you scale, like you can still like as we kind of design Camp 3, and which we're calling Camp Chaos, it's like this whole new like blank canvas to build upon. But there's also that volatility of like building this 42-person project and then suddenly going away, and that can feel like it could have it's very like intense inhale exhale thing. But the Songcamp squad phone heartbeat call is like this just heartbeat that is our anchor, and it is that like drum kind of beat every week, and I think that consistency has been really important for us, because also like a lot of stuff is taking place in the digital sphere. A lot of these DAOs, like like they are like in a lot of ways they are their calls. They are their calls. They are their Discord chats. That's like the makeup of the thing. And the actual like culture, I would say, of those calls has also changed and evolved and gone through its own sort of journey throughout Songcamp. For instance, like I think it was the place where I started to notice what, at first, like a birth of a culture within Songcamp started to take place. I started to like feel into it on the calls. And then I think at some points during the summer, while we were going through Songcamp Elektra, those calls became, much more agendaed or like work focused times where everyone who was part of the call was like getting on there. So it was a bit more work focused. And then we kind of went back into a casual sphere. So it's had its own sort of world. I think like, yeah, in terms of like structure, a lot of it isn't structured. If anything, over the last few weeks, it's like been the first time that I've scribbled down some notes and like tried to follow some sort of agenda, just because there's way more people on the calls now than there has been before. And we're just like trying more things. We're, now incubating some projects in the Discord, so we give them some space to talk. We've now incorporated like giving space for new people on the call to introduce themselves and like give them a prompt to talk a little bit. So like it's been the first times that we actually thrown an agenda together. I personally have like during my music kind of career, I've also been really deep into improv comedy for a number of years. So like I tend to function in like an improvised way. So I like it. I there's an energy that likes to get on the call and like run it, just not sure. But then there's definitely weeks where I'm just like, fuck, like what am I? Like I'm getting on the call, I was like, no idea what I'm going to talk about. But it tends to work itself out. And sometimes I drive the thing more, and then other weeks I lay back and like let the kind of network find its own thing. And this was the first week that I was actually like traveling and going through like a mess to get back over the Canadian border. And it was like, I actually got some anxiety. I was like, shit, I might miss the first call, like the first time I'll ever miss a call. But luckily I was there to at least do the intro. So yeah, but yeah, there's not like crazy structure, save for the fact that there's always been like a pre-call that I have with like one or two folks to sort of like center on the week or just like where we're at before. But often that ends and we like haven't even spoken about what we're going to talk about at the heartbeat call, and it's just like, oh shit, the call's in 4 minutes, bye.
No, but I do think that makes a lot of sense, that you do sort of center with a core group of people. And I think that shines through. There's another piece that I feel like you, or that I notice that you bring into those, that I really appreciate. And I've actually sort of noted it to other people, in that like, and when you said the improv comedy thing, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've had the pleasure of being on a Zoom karaoke session with you. And so you clearly like to host things. You're comfortable doing that. And I think that energy is so important, because often, and I've experienced this, when you're on a Discord town hall, meeting, call, whatever you want to call it within a community, a lot of people are not able to participate on audio. And so there can be a lot of dead space and silence, and there's that awkwardness. And I will say that within Songcamp, I never feel that, where like you sort of hold that space in a really interesting way. And I would love to, just sort of understand a little bit better about how you balance that hosting. You're always in the comments and like reading the pieces and reacting. And how much of that was just sort of you drawing on that improv comedy and like the fact that you've hosted and are clearly comfortable in that kind of setting, versus having to adapt to like, okay, we're in this space where people are participating, but it feels very different. How much of that has been intentional? Because you do it, I think it works really well for the kind of technology we're in currently.
Yeah, well, I think it really developed from the first camp because it was sort of like, it kind of just like decided haphazardly, like Mondays at 4 is when we have our calls, and then we also structured the first camp completely around those Mondays. So Mondays was when put up our first NFT auction to sponsor the camp that Seed Club collected, and then Monday at 4 was also when we launched our auction of the songs. So it really was like the heartbeat of camp, more so than just this call, but just like when we did things, and it gave us these like goalposts to hit. So that maybe started to set that framework up and like kind of put me in this mode of hosting, in the sense that like, especially on, for instance, I felt like this, I need to bring that intention, especially when we're like auctioning something off or like, launching our thing. And then with Elektra too, we launched our Elektra crowdfund on a Monday at 4. So it kind of had that like importance to it. And then I think it's really been the consistency, like the age old, like, consistency is everything. Like I'm really starting to feel that with these calls, and that even I think my like body mind now knows like to be on Mondays at 4. I've found there's been some weeks, especially in like the last few months, where I'm like not feeling maybe at my most energetic on a Monday, kind of tired, maybe feeling burnt out, have that pre-call. I'm like so not into it. But then Monday at 4 comes, and like this is just energy comes, and I'm just like, okay, I'm in host mode. So that's sort of, just kind of naturally, I think, got baked into my schedule. And I agree that calls can feel awkward on Discord. I think also when you're hosting Discord call or on stage or on Twitter Spaces, like sometimes, on our calls, we try to involve more people, but often it can feel like one to many, and it could be like really quiet on that other many side. And it's like, I've felt that pressure to like keep it alive, keep it going, keep that energy going. Cause I'm just like, I don't want people to drop off or hate their time on this call. And I've been very like surprised when we've had like maybe some, reflecting calls or times when we just like speak about things, and people have commented on their relationship with the call, and they're like they're super into the fact that it's unstructured. They get there, they don't know what's going to come, but it's always exciting. I'm like, oh wow, that's like so accidental, but it's working.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit of that too is the curiosity, and sort of beginner's mind. And I'd be interested to hear you talk a little bit about that piece, because I feel like that's been something that has helped shape the calls, and I think also just the narrative in general of, I don't know, and again, like sort of from an external participant's view, I see a lot of beginner's mind and curiosity in how you approach those explorations. And so I'm curious about that, but I think specifically also in sort of bringing people in and making them feel welcome, because I think that it's easy to, like, for example, look at you as, somebody who's, built something now that's been around for a long time in Web3 time, as somebody who's, a veteran now. So how do you balance that sort of, still feeling like a novice or a noob or a beginner's mind, or curious about something when clearly like you know a few things about the space at this point. And how much I guess is conscious versus, how do you cultivate that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's something I think about because I feel like when I when I first fell into this space, it was so like I was so like the gravity that was pulling me into it was so much just like curiosity, because it was like so I was just so inspired and like my imagination was running wild. And I remember experiencing, something that I think a lot of people experience, where it's like it's almost like you're now like there's this like crazy like rapids, rapids in like water, where it's just like, oh my God, this stream is like flying and it's super interesting. And then at some point you like jump in and it's just like you can't even swim. It's like you're drowning in it because it's just this the speed of it, the information the flow, and the excitement of it is very intense. And at the beginning, I remember feeling that sense of curiosity, but I didn't know my place in that at all. And I just felt like I was being pulled somewhere, but I didn't know where. And that definitely produced also the sense of like anxiety and like not uncertainty and all that sort of thing. But I sort of like, yeah, kept with it and just like followed it along. So really, it's been that curiosity that's pulled me through it all. And so that was really strong at the beginning. And I think it's easy to like, yeah, fall into a space where you're here for a while and then be like, okay, I know what there is to know. But sort of baked into the, yeah, ground of Songcamp was like, we are a Web3 laboratory experimenting at the edges of music and Web3. And that like experimental, open-minded curiosity is really baked into it. And so I try to like maintain that energy, and like, on a lot of the calls, I'll like, for new folks, like say that exact line and sort of bring that up so that it's like, I guess, known that that's the thing. And then I think zooming out too, it's like, the constant also kind of meme of like, it's still early, we're so early. It feels very true. Like, I feel like we're in these like prehistoric times of the space. And I think it's, again, it goes back to what you're talking about of like having space and pulling away from yourself and anchoring into something more centered, rather than being so lost into the like language and lexicon of and culture of today, because it changes a lot and it's like easy to get absorbed in that rapid stream of water. But I remember when I started Songcamp, it's like the term DAO wasn't even being like used to the level it is today. It was like sort of starting, but it was like really NFT was the thing. Everyone was like, what's an NFT? What's an NFT? And DAO wasn't even being touched on. There's like the 2014 Vitalik essay and like, of course, the DAO and other stuff, but it wasn't where it is today. And it grew so quickly. I remember when it was taking off, DAO, 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 ever DAO, DAO, DAO. And I remember being a little bit critical of it. I was just like, we don't even know. No one's like, we're using this word. And now it's so baked in. Like now the word is DAO. Everything's DAO. But I still like, I zoom out on that and I'm like, yeah, maybe like, I don't even, this may be a hot take, but I don't know if DAO is actually going to be like, I have doubts that the word DAO will be the meme that carries all the way through for organizations. While I think NFT will, that's just my hot take. I think I tweeted that yesterday, or I thought about tweeting it. But anyway, I digress. I just think like the point being that I think we still don't know anything. And I think like the only thing that feels sane to do in the space when it feels like there's so much potential and excitement, but we don't know anything, is just to run experiments, is just to play. And so that's really like the energy I try to like keep hold to. And I think it's like to actually experientially feel that, it's like you need to anchor into something sort of creative or outside of the Twitter Discord sphere to like recognize that.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. And, I think, in that first part of our conversation, I think it's focused so much on all of these sort of innate parts of your personality that you've brought to the table as far as leading Songcamp and bringing them into the culture. And I think, everybody is going to need to find how they bring themselves into those various roles and how they manage and build communities. But I think that, certainly Songcamp is one in the way that you sort of go about building that culture, I think has worked really well and is a great one to look at as far as how do you start having those rituals and those ways of being and sort of living the values. okay, so you brought up the DAO word. I earlier threw out the term DAO leader, which like ultimately I was like, okay, wait, is that an oxymoron? Also, Songcamp is not even actually a DAO. So the minute that I said it, I had a sort of like a whiplash or a knee-jerk reaction. But I guess, okay, so I won't like pin you down and ask you questions about DAOs specifically. But I think that Songcamp actually as a Web3 project has been moving kind of slowly, for like comparatively. So like the projects, like you said, you're rolling out experiments, you're doing a ton, you're producing a ton. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as sort of the like very traditional Web3 mechanics, like tokens and, governance, et cetera, Songcamp itself has been much more slow on that side. And I'd love to hear just how you've been thinking about those really intentional decisions and the pace at which you're making them.
Yeah. I think like the biggest kind of like moment that started the conversation really ignited was after the first camp, and we sold our first 3 music NFTs, and it went super well. And then it was like when token, when token, when token, when token, and people wanted to design a token, and that was part of the conversation. You know, at the time I was like saying my response was like incentive design, like what incentives are we trying to design for here if we're launching a token, and kind of, and then the Elektra project started taking shape, and the idea came to us to like, what if we launch that project with a token? We get to experiment with this project-based token to like fit in that world, and then now Elektra's evolved into its own DAO, essentially, where it is a DAO and has a token and has like this governance process in place. And what's interesting is it feels like we're able to see some of the other kind of like, yeah, like what the strengths and challenges that comes with that stuff in the Elektra kind of project. And Songcamp was never really started with the intention of let's figure out how to like kind of launch a token and own this thing together. I think the idea is it feels very much like a collective project where it's like collective, like it's like a distributed network of artists working on it. Yes, I am pushing it forward and leading the calls and at the forefront of designing these camps, but it feels like this amazing network that I want to continue to nourish. And I think like, so with that, the idea has been to be very intentional with bringing a token into the world and what that would mean. I think we're very, protective of the culture that's been fostering there, and that culture has been tokenless. And introducing a token definitely changes things in some ways for the better. It's exciting. You have a token, like you're exposed to the upside of this project in a clear way, and there can be like actual liquidity that shows you the number tied to that thing. But I think like, again, I think we're in very early days of these sorts of structures and how we do kind of carve out our upside and exposure to the project. And so I've been more wanting to like watch and like see how these things develop and introduce them in kind of slower ways to the project. We're starting now to give more shape to the ecosystem and sort of zooming out of Songcamp and calling this entire ecosystem we're building Camp, and Songcamp being a part of that, and Elektra being a part of that, and also our BPM project being a part of that, and whatever else incubates and comes out of this world can be a part of that, and want to make that like really a network that folks can feel like they want to build in, and breathe, and to breathe life into that with a token makes a lot of sense. But we're definitely taking our time and want to do it right.
I love that, and I think that it's just such a wise and astute way of going about it, because I think that the other pieces, the culture, the ritual, the community, are complex, And I mean, you can always mint a token. It takes about 5 minutes. So when it's right, you'll find your time to do that. Other tech tools in Web3 are definitely not so simple. And I'm curious, I don't know, one of my like early theses personally was that, sort of the music industry at large and other entertainment sides of things, innovation was really going to come from allowing artists to reshape how tools should be made and how tech should be used. And what's excited me about Web3 is that I finally see that happening where artists say, well, like, can I do this thing? And because the devs and artists are so close and in many cases actually the same people, the answers are finally yes. And so it's not just like, okay, well, here's a supply chain, just put your music on the conveyor belt and like hope for the best. And, and so I'd love to get into the weeds a little bit about your experience bending technology to your will, whether it was some of the like super interesting experiences of how Discord worked in Elektra. So, I got to play the game and stayed up late at least one night trying to figure out some of the riddles and puzzles with people and doing these call and response problems within some of the Discord channels where, you would say something and then you would get something back. And it definitely felt different than other servers. And if like I was still within Discord, but even my memory of it feels a little bit more like I was in a world, to be honest, versus just like, okay, like back on the Discord channel with, a million other servers and notifications, etc. And so, yeah, I would love for you to talk a little bit about that specific example of, bending Discord to your will and vision. But just generally also, I think that BPM is another great example of basically, I'm an artist, this is a thing that should exist, and I'm going to make it happen. And, the fun parts, but also I'd love to hear about the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, well, kind of like excitingly learned that early on in that when we first put up Songcamp Discord and started like planning the first camp, the kind of thought was like, oh, if we built this like community of musicians and artists and we did projects together and experimented with like Web3 and NFTs, maybe we'll one day reach like the point of like scale where we have the leverage to go to these projects and like have them, incorporate what like feedback and product user kind of like feedback and actually put it into their product. And what I learned in running the first camp was like, oh, that's way more within reach than I thought. I thought that would take like 10 camps and we, maybe one day be able to say, can you do this here? But actually these projects were so early and like, specifically it was like Mirror and Catalog that we were using for the first camp. We were able to like speak to the teams and have them interoperate and support each other such that we could release music NFTs on a Mirror auction, which like that support didn't exist yet at the time. And so that was really empowering to see that, oh, like a bunch of artists can just like make these things happen. And, that's again, very early. These projects were just taking off. Does that continue for everyone? Maybe not, but now we're seeing more and more. Yeah, more even like artists, devs are falling into the space and running really interesting experiments and being able to really like directly pour their creativity into these smart contracts right away and bring life to them. So that it's very exciting. And we want to, in the next camp, we're really thinking about it as a songwriting camp mixed with a Web3 hackathon to really like just push those two worlds together and see what comes out the other end. In terms of what we did for Elektra and for BPM. So yeah, for Elektra, we were developing this story, right? And this world was coming to life and these amazing audiovisual pieces were coming to life. And then I remember it was Connie Digital, who was like an OG, musician in the crypto Web3 space, had the idea of like, what if the Elektra Discord was its own server? And that was what inspired like the first idea of, oh, actually bringing this thing to life on Discord. And then also introducing these like interactive game-like flows to really move people through this thing. And that's what, gave birth to this whole idea of people buying NFT portal tickets to travel through the portal of Elektra and fall into this Discord game. And that was definitely like challenging, and we were building it in real time as people were falling into that world. And I was, yeah, I was kind of doing a lot of it, and then a few others started to really help me build out the game and stuff, and just kind of bending these Discord bots to like do what we wanted, um, without really having access to like Discord bot devs at the time to actually like whip up our own custom bots. Now I'm in some servers and they have like really cool bots, and I'm like, where are these bots from? And they seem to be like custom built. But we were just like, yeah, using these kind of Discord bots that existed to like create these, like you said, call and response things to actually, when the right code is dropped into the server, it'll pop up like an answer, or some next level or something. And we were definitely limited in what we were able to do. One of the problems that we ran into was like, it'd be great if we could create this flow for every single game player almost to have their own channel. And we couldn't figure out really how to do that. Now I've seen other Discords have that, where they have like almost your own channel within, it was either kind of like DM, or you're in a channel that other people can see, sort of thing. And so we ended up using another bot to actually like erase answers really quickly. So that if people tried things and they were wrong or right, it would just like erase all of the history, so that if someone showed up there a minute later, they would have to do it themselves. So yeah, we really kind of like played around with it and just hacked it together. And it was fun, and it was definitely challenging to like keep up and keep building this flow. But um, it was really fun to like be able to bend Discord to our whim there. And then with BPM was actually, yeah, lightning fast and really exciting, because we had the idea to like build this Web3 music Discord bot where we can listen to catalog NFTs in our Discord calls. And I put that idea up on Mirror with a small crowd fund and filled it up in like half a day for a few ETH. And then through that process also attracted like some people from FWB who wanted that thing built. So they threw in some FWB tokens saying like, whoever builds this will get access to Friends with Benefits. And then through that excitement, like found Daniel, a dev who reached out on Twitter and was like already building it. He was like, I spent all night last night like building an MVP. I was like, amazing. So we ended up having a working, functioning V1 like within 72 hours and ready for our next Monday heartbeat call. So that was a really exciting kind of like experience in getting an idea to a functioning thing really quickly. Now it's taken a bit more time, but we actually have a V2 ready to go with some more exciting support and features of the bot that we're ready to bring forth. The only problem is we don't have a verified bot, and to go over 100 servers, you needed your bot to be verified. And the BPM Discord bot is in 92 servers, which is like mind blowing because we didn't really, expect to like get that bot in all those servers. So it's very cool.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, I did not realize that. Congrats on that. That's awesome. Well, we're just about at time, but I have one other question, because obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about this, and I think it's worth highlighting, which is the interplay between gaming specifically, and obviously you sort of built a video game, whether on purpose or sort of by mistake. It sort of turned a little bit into a video game, and I guess I'm just curious if you have a take on what that music gaming sort of overlap and connection is going to look like as it develops into Web3.
Yeah, I saw this great tweet. I think it was Brian Flynn at Rabbit Hole who said, was it? It might have been someone else. I apologize if it was someone else, but the tweet was about how like we've separated kind of like these industries, like music is its own thing, and all these different mediums into their own sort of silos, because the sort of like distribution mechanics and the way those kind of like economics worked made them so. But I think like those walls are falling down, and we experience that within Songcamp. And one of the reasons we're like zooming out and calling it camp is because it's a focus on music, but it's really all art. Like visual art is being done, gaming is being done, economic mechanics are being done, writing is being done, and I think like the excitement with these Web3 rails is it allows these things to meld together and build completely new ways of distributing things. And I think with those coming down, yeah, we're going to experience all sorts of new kind of interplay between music and gaming and visuals and writing and all this stuff to give birth to new kind of like, yeah, new ways of packaging art together that we maybe don't even have the language for. And that's super exciting because I think as a musician and knowing other musicians, like we just want to make music, and I don't think it doesn't need to be, like you said, down this like conveyor belt onto these Spotify's and what have you as the means, but or the end of that. But it can like go into all sorts of different packages, including some like gaming type flows, and we're going to continue to explore stuff like that, especially with Elektra. But yeah, I think like the main takeaway for me is really like not even looking at it as the music industry and the visual art world and this, but like allowing those things to the lines to completely blur and come up with new exciting ways to build art.
Yeah. Well, I'm very much looking forward to camp in 2022, and yeah, congrats on what you've built and continue to build. So where can we find you? Obviously Mondays, 4 p.m. Eastern, but where else?
Yeah. Well, I spend most of my time on Twitter and Discord, and I'm at Matthew Chaim on both of those things. Well, I guess there's some numbers after that on Discord, but you can find me in like the Songcamp Discord, and yeah, we have our calls every Monday at 4 p.m. and also Songcamp is on Twitter, Songcamp _ for that Twitter.
Yeah, that was a fun naming process. Well, thank you so much, and it was it was great to talk today, and really appreciate the time and what you're building.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. This was fun.